our job, obviously, we didn't do a good enough job making sure that they were aware of the budget situation, of the problem coming. But that being said, we know that's coming, and it's coming fairly soon. So what this is telling me is that if we ran a referendum, chances are it wouldn't pass unless we really made people aware of the problem. Is that fair?
It would not pass. That is correct. And the question is the solution. Is the solution the closing of the schools in the minds of residents? Is the solution to ask for operating funds to keep the schools open and let the community decide on that? Because at this point in time, there's just limited, they don't know what the problem is they're trying to fix. I mean, typically it comes down, when you talk about closing schools historically, there's two reasons. There's not enough money to operate them, or the buildings are in such disrepair that it's too costly to make the investment in those buildings. So the community, I think, at this point isn't aware of which of those problems is trying to be solved. Local newspaper, it's the informal discussions. Stronger, more robust, and long-term intentional communication is critical. I mean, when you're talking about a bond referendum or an operating levy, you need a runway. Identify the problem that you're trying to solve. You bring the community together to come up with a solution to fix the problem that they agree on. But oftentimes that can take 12, 18 months in order to do it. So I really think, that's why I say you're unusual, simply because you have the power of the local newspaper still here. It really isn't any sort of funding request from a district. There are three factors that impact district success. When you first look at what the package is, how much it costs. Obviously, those are going to be the factors. But in those battery of atmospheric questions, there are three keys. If a resident says the district the past couple years has spent taxpayers' money effectively and efficiently, they do a good job of involving the community, and they trust the district to do what's right. If you get 3 yeses from a person on that question, 90% of the time they will support a funding request.
We know we have a problem coming with our budget, and and obviously the survey says that people don't know that we have a problem, but we know it's coming regardless, based on what our projections are and what we've tried to show in the last probably 4 or 5 or 6 months, however long we've been, since November. So my question, or I guess my concern, is that we're trying to, I guess, be proactive to that, because we know that if we don't do something, we know, and I'll just say the ship is sinking, so to speak. We know that we are going to be in statutory operating debt. So we know that is coming. But if we don't do something, if we do something, now what we're hearing is, well, we shouldn't do it, or we're doing it too fast, but then if we run a referendum, it's going to fail, and now we're going to be probably in a worse spot, because we're going to have to say close Dr. Knight anyway, and we're going to be that much further down the road, at least is how I'm seeing what you're telling me.
The bond referendum proposal is based upon saving operational funds, correct? So I think, that being said, instead of the bond referendum, we did not test it in the survey. But what I believe makes the most sense on this question right now is have the community decide on an operating levy. And the operating levy would be to provide the funds to maintain keeping the schools open, maintaining class sizes, maintaining programming, all of those sorts of things. That probably, then you don't have the division of the board closes or the board doesn't close, and having a solution, like I said, seeking a problem. It really, if the community, then the community owns the decision. At the end of the day, they will decide. It'll be very clear. It has to be you need a vote yes. And the district can't do it. The district can just say, here's the information, here's the tax impact, vote. That's all you can say. The community has to do the vote yes if they want to get it passed for those purposes. To me, then you've had the discussion with the community. The community's decided. If the community gives you the operating funds, the problem is solved at this point over the course of the campaign. So to me, that's where I would start as a recommendation. Will I guarantee the operating levy will succeed? I can't. At this point in time, we didn't test the question. I know it won't be as polarizing as the bond referendum to close the schools.
And I appreciate that, and I think that can relate a little bit to here too, speaking about Dr. Knight, which is in Randall, which is 10 miles away, whereas in Little Falls here and stuff, I mean, I have gotten emails in support of closing, and as this has said, and are we going to run into that same deal that, okay, we're going to run a bond referendum to keep the schools open? Well, our Little Falls residents going to skip to the polls and say, yeah, I'm voting no for that one, because now I'm not going to have a property tax increase. So kind of some of the same thing. It's hard for me knowing what's coming and not being proactive to address it. Yeah, this is not an open discussion, ma'am.
First thing that has to happen, obviously, it's starting to raise awareness of the discussion, of the problem. But even 2 to 3 weeks ago, it was still limited in understanding what the problem was. And so to build on that, and I think, it might be different than the suburban. Maple Grove still doesn't care what Brooklyn Park does, and Brooklyn Park doesn't care what Maple Grove does. So you do have the sense of community here. And if there's something in it too, because, it would be disruptive to the whole system. It's not just Randall, those that attend the Randall area schools and that community would it be disruptive to. It would disrupt kids too. I mean, if you're doing a bond referendum and remodeling a 9-12 high school, that doesn't happen over a summer. So that's going to impact kids too. So I just, the bond referendum at this point, I would advise strongly against to move forward at this point. That's not to say that, but you really need to lay foundational work here.